Hi, this is Burr Stewart, and my motto is never let household infrastructure get in the way of a perfectly good model railroad. So I hid the furnace with a lift-out section of my main yard in Bayside in Everett. And in this video, we're going to show how we moved the trains out of the way, got that hatch out of the way, maintained the furnace, got the hatch put back, and we had fun with trains the entire time. So let's start out by figuring out how to clear the yard so that I can remove that access hatch. Now the first thing was to pull up the NCE throttle, select the locomotive, and get on our way with the train that happened to be on the back track with the locomotive already on it. And that's just a coincidence. But there it was. I stopped in order to flip the switches because you don't want to go over a switch that's thrown against you. I meant to line the turnouts, line the switches. We're having a debate about what to call these moves. But anyway, having lined the switches, we then proceeded to pull the train out of the way of the access hatch. And I just drove the engine into the tunnel there on the left, just far enough so these cars cleared the hatch. No big deal. You can watch my little control. Now, see the arrow there? That's where the left side of the hatch is, and we're going to have to move those cars out of the way, and then we can remove it. Now, the next thing to move was these three engines and some other cars that were on the old part of the Bayside yard. So after a few minutes, I was able to get these three brand new GP38s over onto track, let's see, what is that, track 3? I guess it's track 2, 2 over from the main line. Get ready. Bang! Now keep an eye on the left for that little arrow. I'll show you where the joint was. And there were some cars there on track 2. And then there were some more a little further down. So we had to go down and get the entire cut so we could pull it out. Bang! Now this bang wasn't hard enough to join the couplers, so I had to reach in with my hands and smash those couplers together. But now we have the whole train on this track 2, ready to pull away. Now we put the engines in reverse and haul off to the right. The main point of this is to show you that you don't have to have a formal operating session to enjoy running trains. In this case, we just needed to get some cars out of the way, and here we are running trains. And my finger is pointing to where that joint was in the hatch that we needed to remove. That modern-looking flat car was actually built before 1973 and was a brand new piece of equipment in the era of this model railroad. So I'm always glad to run it. I think the Penn Central car at the end is also appropriate for the era, but I'm not sure. In a minute, we're going to show you how we removed the rail joiners and the buildings so that we could get at this hatch. But first, we have to have one toot means we're stopped. There we go. So now we get to the business at hand, which is removing all of the rail joiners on all 7 of these tracks. And of course, I'm speeding up the video so you don't have to watch as long as it took me to get this done. But it wasn't too hard, as you see, sliding the rail joiners off so that the crack could be opened. Now, I only maintain the furnace about once every 10 years. There we go, thumbs up for those joints. Now we had to go to the other side, get rid of the buildings, slide the rail joiners off. You can see a little bit of a lighter colored ballast along the strip there. A few years ago, I went ahead and ballasted the crack so that you wouldn't see it quite as much. But the bottom line, thumbs up, is we've got all the rail joiners, except I realized we also had to do it on the main line that climbs up towards Skykomish. And we have all the rail joiners moved off. And now we've done it for that side. And I put some thumbtacks down to secure the track. And here, as I was saying, I wanted to clear out that gap in between the removable section and the permanent benchwork, so I used an X-Acto knife to get that done. And also to open up the scenery there. And we're now all finished. You can see the removable section is gone, and we have tracks on both sides with the furnace in the middle, all ready to be worked on. Very nice. So now we have the furnace maintainer hard at work trying to figure out if there's anything wrong with the furnace and how well it's going to last. If you can imagine, this is a 50-year-old electric forced air furnace, and basically the bottom line is it's still in good working order. And I can probably go another 10 years until some electrical component fails, which it could do with a 50-year-old furnace. But as we're showing here in the video, there's no problem with getting that hatch out. So now that we're done with the furnace maintenance, I just wanted to clean up the slots there, the tracks where the hatch slides in. And so I used my little portable vacuum cleaner. And came back with the hatch. And tried to get it in there. It was a little bit tight for my taste. This took me longer than I was hoping it would, as you can see here. And I didn't damage too much of the scenery. And we will have to go back and ballast those cracks again. But it looks pretty good. It fit right in where it's supposed to. So now we go back through the whole process in reverse. I connected up the electrical plug so that all of the tracks on the removable section would be powered. And then I went and reinstalled the rail joiners in the main line and slid them back onto the tracks in the yard. Now, of course, this is speeded up 8 times real. And it was a little harder getting the rail joiners back on than it was sliding them off, which isn't too surprising. This one rail where I'm at now was a little tight, so I had to fuss with it quite a bit before I was able to figure it out. And then I was also able to put the little shelf that supports a part of the yard back on. That's a detail that I didn't get into earlier, but I had to remove those screws in order to remove the removable section. I guess you could call it a module. So here I'm putting the screws back in, and it looks like we're ready to move to the other side now that I got those screws in. So we put the rail joiners on this side. This is the left side. And you can see that little bit of a slot in the ballast that we'll have to come back and fix later. What I found on this side was that a couple of the rail joiners had their ends kind of smashed in, and so I ended up having to bring in a couple of new rail joiners, which is no big deal, but it did take a little extra time. I cut all that out so you don't have to watch how long it took me to get all these rail joiners back in, but it did eventually. Oh, there's the new rail joiner, see, that I'm putting in there. That's a code 55 track and code 55 rail joiner. So then we needed to put the rest of the layout back together. This is the circuit that controls the proto throttles. And then, of course, we have the buildings coming back together. And I remembered that tree that I had taken off the slot. See, the tree is in a nice position to hide that little crack in the scenery. Very good. And I needed to remove the thumbtacks from the main line. And we're ready to get back to operations and bring the trains back into the yard and call the job well done. So the first thing we wanted to do was back this train back into track 2. It just seems like a minute ago that we were pulling it out, but actually this was a couple of days of process. Now I'm showing you the throttle again, how it works a little bit. These are the brand new Rapido GP38s that I talked about in a previous video. We're just breaking them in and trying to figure out what we're going to do with them because they didn't actually run on the Burlington Northern in 1973. They were a later acquisition, but they're wonderful engines. Now you can see we're slithering back onto track 2 here. Very nice. As I've said many times, I think backing through an S-curve is a really fun part of model railroad operations, especially if it doesn't derail. I originally built this yard as a 4-track yard, the 4 tracks on the right side, and then I added those 3 tracks on the left later when we realized how much work we had to do here in Bayside and that we just needed some extra tracks. Turned out the prototype had 2 4-track yards in a line. One was called the Scott's Yard for the Scott Paper Company, and the other one was called the New Yard because they built it after the Scott Paper Company. So we did the same thing here with the tracks on the left being the New Yard and the tracks on the right being the Scott Yard. Anyway, now we're getting ready to pull the other train back in that was parked in the tunnel. Took me a while to figure out what was the engine number on that because I couldn't see the locomotive. But we did eventually get it done. And we're able to back the train onto track 3. Now, did you notice a strange bumping movement there in the log car? And you saw me peering at it. I was not sure why there would be a bumping happening there. The car didn't derail, but it did bump. So that warrants some further investigation, which you'll see in a minute we'll do. It turns out that when we were putting this removable hatchback, we banged on the benchwork enough to dislodge some of the loose scenic materials that were around, the details. When we got to this point, it just stopped. It wouldn't move any further. And I was suspicious that it was hung up on something. And I pulled on it from the back, and I pulled on it from the front, and it seemed to be hung up. So I really had no choice but to remove the cars and examine the situation. And then it occurred to me you might want to see what I was doing. So in a second, I bring the camera around and show you what the situation was. It took me a while to troubleshoot this because I put it back on and I still couldn't see what was happening. You can see now I'm using one of the new TCS throttles. They're pretty cool, but that's another subject. Yeah, I pulled that car out of the way, and now I'll show you what was happening. Pretty funny, really. See, there was a little piece of livestock. I guess you wouldn't appreciate being called a piece of livestock if you were the livestock. But anyway, I had to push it back away from the track. It had fallen over and was blocking the passage of the trains. So once we got rid of that ancient Swedish lamb, or whatever it was, we were able to push the train back on its own, and it wasn't hung up. So that was very nice. I suppose it's possible there are other things that went wrong as a part of this hatch removal, which we'll discover in future days, but maybe not too much. I think that whole thing went pretty smoothly with the hatch removal. So now we have this train back where it was before we started. And I think we're now ready to just take a survey of what had happened. There's the left-hand side slot where I'm pointing, and where we took all the rail joiners out and put them all the way back in after we removed the hatch. And then on the right side, we have the same thing. Behind that little map, which we removed, we were able to take those rail joiners off. We got the buildings back, we got the trains back, and we're ready to go back to full-on operations. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you want to see a more formal operating session, there's plenty of videos on this channel that show those. I just wanted you to see that even when you're maintaining the furnace, you can have a lot of fun with trains. So for now, this is Burr Stewart, wishing you much fun with trains.